Gundam franchise is no stranger when it comes to video games. The majority of these early games were RPG games, with a plethora of SD Gundam games on the Famicom and Super Famicom. But to shake things up, there were a few action games thrown into the mix. Today we'll be looking at Zeta Gundam Hot Scramble. The game's introduction gives us a rundown of the basic plot of Zeta Gundam. It recaps how the Earth Federation defeated Zeon during the One-Year War. Since this is an unofficial translation, because the game was never released in English, Zeon is misspelled Zion instead. The actual correct romanization would be Geon, as evidenced in the letter from Char's counterattack and the dubbing error in the Mobile Suit Gundam TV series episode Space Fortress of Awaku, where they mistakenly called the Zeong the Geong. But I'm getting off topic. The intro summarizes how, after the One-Year War, the Federation became corrupted and the Titans came to power, and how the AUG is fighting back against them. We then get the enemy roll call with quite a large cast. They include just about every major Titans mobile suit, as well as all of the mobile suits from Axis, all 2 of them. For a Famicom game, I gotta say it is kind of ambitious to have that many mobile suits in the game. But that's just about where the creativity stops. When you hit start, you'll see what stage you're on, and you go into a first-person flying shooter. Move the cursor around with the D-pad and press the B button to shoot. Your weapon, the Zeta Gundam's beam rifle, is shown just above the heads-up display, and it looks like a soda can shooting long white bars. The first thing you'll notice is the repeating background. It's a giant checkerboard that loops endlessly. I thought I was playing Zeta Gundam, not Bubsy 3D. The enemies start flying at you, and most of them are either on Dodai hovercrafts or are transforming mobile suits like Ashimars and Kaplants. After you shoot down enough enemies, you'll enter a space level where you do the exact same thing, but with some different enemies. After killing enough enemies here, one of 2 things will happen. You'll either fly straight towards your next objective, which is usually a space colony or an asteroid base, or you get a boss battle against a powerful mobile suit like the Psycho Gundam Mark II, or against a battleship like the Jupitrus or Dogo Skier. After defeating the battleship, you'll fly inside it instead of the colony. Once you're in the next part of the stage, it becomes a side-scrolling platformer. The controls are simple and easy to understand at least. B shoots your beam rifle like in FPS mode, while A jumps. Press and hold jump to change into Zeta Gundam's Wave Rider mode. Unless you're holding a specific direction, you'll automatically start flying whatever direction you're facing. Low on HP? Grab one of these boxes that look like Optimus Prime's truck grill and it'll repair your Gundam. There are also shield and beam rifle power-ups that can increase your defense and attack power. You don't activate them, they're automatically active as soon as you pick them up. You navigate your way through a maze until you eventually come to what looks like a reactor core. Every time you shoot it, it shoots back in a spread fire that does a lot of damage. After enough shots, the core explodes and you proceed to the next level. And that's it. That's the entire game. Earth segment, space segment, side-scrolling segment, and just repeat that cycle for 16 stages, and that's the entire game. It becomes kind of monotonous pretty quickly. Once you reach stage 2, you discover that the music never changes. There are only a handful of music tracks in the game. There's only 5 in the whole game. For the first 2 or 3 levels, the repetitive gameplay and droning music aren't so bad, but by level 8, you'll be begging for a different game. Of the 5 music tracks, you have one for the title screen and introduction, one for when you start the next level, one for the level theme, one for the victory theme after you blow up the reactor core, and one for the game over theme. Speaking of game overs, you only get 1 life before it boots you back to the title screen. Fortunately, you just have to select continue to keep going, but if you're not careful, you could accidentally hit start, and then you'd have to start your game over from the first mission. Another oddity is that in between the game and title screen, there's a frame or 2 that is just the entire game screen filled with numbers. It varies where you game over at, but still, it feels like the whole game itself is unraveling right in front of you. But oddly enough, this wasn't the only version of the game to exist. Later on, there's another version simply called Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam Hot Scramble Final Version. This redone version is basically the same game, but it has different music and the heads-up display is completely different now. It tells you how many enemies are left on the screen and where each one is in relation to you. While that improvement is nice, I don't like the music as much. It's more dull and not as lively. But the biggest change is that it completely removed the platforming segments. Why would they do that? The platforming segments were the best part of the game. I mean, sure, yeah, it got annoying whenever you had to kill the reactor core over and over again every single mission, but when I was playing the side-scrolling parts, it felt like I was actually playing a game that was about skill and not just dumb luck like the FPS segments. Another thing, there was some actual variety during the platforming segments. That's the biggest problem with this game. It eventually just gets boring. So much flying, so much shooting, and it's never consistent about how long it could take. Everything's too random. Honestly, I think this game would have been a lot better if it was just platforming. Imagine playing a game in the style of Robotech on the Game Boy Advance, but it's Zeta Gundam instead. That would be freaking awesome! Also, I gotta say the graphics bear a striking resemblance to the game Transformers Mystery of Convoy, also on Famicom. I half expect to run into Ultra Magnus while I'm flying around in this colony. The game actually reminds me a lot of the Famicom Transformers game. Similar graphic style, droning and repetitive music that makes you want to fall asleep, and the boss fights are completely different from all the other enemies in the game. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that they're made by the same company. But even with its flaws, Hot Scramble is miles ahead of the Famicom Transformers game. You don't die in one hit, and the enemies can't shoot through walls, though they can glitch through the walls if they happen to be spawning in. But this game is still pretty difficult at times. These gun turrets, I'm pretty sure, are indestructible. If they're not, then they're not worth the time to destroy them, because all they do is repeatedly fire straight left or right, so you're better off just flying around them than trying to blow them up. The most difficult part of the game is Stage 16. After the Earth stage, which started incorporating surface-level gun turrets that shoot at you, remind me of the towers from the Death Star, you're treated to the hardest part of the game. In this stage, you're fighting against the last few remaining Titans, which are Shirako's VO and the Psycho Gundam Mark II. But you're also dealing with Haman Karn and her Kubelay. That on its own isn't terrible, but as any fan of Zeta Gundam will know, the Kubelay has these flying beam cannons called funnels. But because this is Famicom, during the space segment, they're only shown as tiny clumps of pixels. At first, I didn't even know what was hitting me. They're so small they almost blend into the stars in the background. I can't tell you how many times they shot me down. After you eventually manage to shoot down all the enemies, you storm the Axis base, and it looks like that the only enemies in here are the Kubelay and her funnels. The funnels can be destroyed, but I don't think the Kubelay can. Either way, you're in the home stretch now. Destroy the last core, and then you move on to Stage 17. It's at this point that the stages just start repeating. To actually see the ending, you'll need to get the game over after beating Stage 16. And I gotta give him credit that at least the end credit sequence matches the one from the anime pretty closely, with Fa running while Haru's bouncing. And that was Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam Hot Scramble. More like Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam Hot Garbage. This is mostly just a game that hasn't aged very well. I'm sure that back in the day it would have been more fun, but all this did was make me want to go back and play Encounters in Space or any of the Gundam Versus games. Honestly, the game is so monotonous and basic it feels more like one of those cheap games that come in those plug-and-play consoles, or something an amateur game designer could make up. I know this was over 20 years after the game came out, but some of the people I took programming classes with in high school could make something more complex than this. The biggest problem is that the cursor moves too slow in FPS mode. In the early stages it's not too tough, but later on it becomes a real issue. Also, with how bland the heads-up display is, it feels more like an internet flash game, and honestly, it'd be way more fun that way. If I could move the cursor with a mouse, then it'd be a lot easier to control and the game would just be more satisfying. The game feels clunky with the two different playstyles too. It'd be a lot better if it was just platforming segments, unlike the final version. But credit where credit is due. Hot Scramble hit most of the major points from the TV show, and you visit most of the important locations, like Green Noah 1, the Gate of Zedan, the Grips Colony Laser, and Axis. And again, it has all the main mobile suits. So at least there was an effort put into the game. Not completely awful, but I think I'll stick to Gundam vs. Zeta Gundam or Dynasty Warriors Gundam instead. This has been Blade Cross EXE, part of Flagship Blades Productions, with another Gogglehead review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.